The opinions of J. Michael McCoy and his guests are not necessarily the opinions of KPOG, any particular religious denomination, or any other theological institution. Thanks for listening to Mac's World Live, living free through forgiveness, live on KPOG and webcast1live.com.
All right, good morning. It is 10 o'clock in the morning on the 19th anniversary of September 11th. It's the 11th of September in the year 2020. And today, we're going to read Jesus Calling, of course. I don't get it done every day. I don't know why. I don't choose to not do it. I just kind of overlook it, I guess. So we're going to read what Jesus Calling says for September 11th, which, by the way, this daily devotional is based on Scripture. Today's is Philippians 4, Psalm 102, and 1 Peter 1. And then I'm going to share with you some thoughts I have, as well as some thoughts of some other people, because people are a lot smarter than I am for the most part, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. And one of my favorite lines is, if two people always agree, one of us isn't necessary, and you, my friend, are very, very necessary. Speaking of necessary people, good morning, Darren. Good morning, Les, my friend. Good morning, Alicia. Good morning to those of you who are choosing to join us through social media on Facebook. And whenever I say that, it takes me back to, well, it would be 12 years ago now, when I first decided to build an online platform, which includes the physical studios of webcast1live.com. And we are about to celebrate our 12th birthday, and that will be in December. And I remember when my son, my youngest son, and a gentleman that I always called my tech angel, suggested that I take my talk radio program onto the social media platform rather than depending on terrestrial radio. And as a radio guy for, at the time, it would have been almost 40 years, I got into radio when I was 14. In my hometown of Beatrice, Nebraska, on KWBE, which we called Queeby. What a weird name, but it made so much sense. KWBE, Queeby. And so in 2023, good heavens, I will celebrate 50 years, God willing, in this business. So as a guy who depended on antennas and towers and studios and radio frequencies, the idea that I would betray, I'm using that word somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but betray my fellow broadcasters by joining the opposition. No, not opposition. That's not the right word. People who went online were not opposing terrestrial radio. They were just finding that there was a very economical and very workable way to bring their message to whomever through webcasting. Just so you know, the difference between a webcast and a podcast is audio only, and a webcast is audio and video. So this is a webcast. Here we sit 12 years later, and the listenership on terrestrial radio is almost nil. What a sad thing to say. And the number of listeners that we have to this program on social media, YouTube, Facebook, etc., far, 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 far outweigh the audience that's listening on our terrestrial signal at 102.9 KPOG. POG standing for the power of God. So glad to have you here. And by the way, a shameless plug, one of the things that I enjoy doing is helping people produce, write, become a webcaster themselves. And my studios are available for people to use should they want to embark upon the webcasting world. Maybe it's a daily thing. I don't know. You got to be pretty committed, constitutionally committed to a daily show because it's a lot of work. But I love the work, so I don't mind doing it. Or you might do a weekly, or you might do a monthly. Anyway, should you ever choose that your passion, and by the way, that's the question I asked. Oh, Mac, my name's Beaver, and I want to do a podcast. I want to do a webcast. I want to do my own show. Okay, Beaver, what are you passionate about? And here comes the litmus test. Well, let me think. Passion. Well, I like the Hawkeyes. And no, here's the way that question is answered. So, Beaver, what are you passionate about? Oh, I'm passionate about blank. And there it is. Because you don't have to search for passion. Passion sits on the end of your tongue, on your sleeves, on your feet, on your ears, your nose, everything. Passion sits right there. And when asked the question, what are you passionate about? You'll know that answer. And that's where we start, should you ever want to produce and host your own podcast, webcast, etc. Just give me a call, look me up, and we'll make it happen for you. All right, September 11th, forevermore known as 9/11. Rejoice in me always. No matter what is going on, you can rejoice in your love relationship with me. This is a secret of being content in all circumstances. I'm going to push pause here. This is what the Greek word makarios stands for, which means God's never-ending love and joy. I can tell you that when even the worst of things happen to me, I never shake my fist at God. Well, we have conversations, don't get me wrong. But my faith is never tarnished, never questioned, never wondered. I'm told by people in my life that that's a spiritual gift. That's not something that I decide because sinful nature is too strong in this world for me to just decide that I'm never going to question faith. It's a gift from God. I accept it humbly. I'm just telling you that it in my life, and yours too, it's possible to have makarios, never-ending joy, and God's love, unquestionable, unconditional love. Push play. This is the secret of being content in all my circumstances, a love relationship with me. So many people dream of the day when they will finally be happy, when they're out of debt, when their children are out of trouble, when they have more leisure time, and so on. While they daydream, their moments are trickling into the ground like precious water spilling wastefully from overturned bottles. Fantasizing about future happiness will never bring fulfillment because fantasy is unrealistic. It's not reality. Even though I am invisible, I am far more real than the world you see around you. My reality is eternal and unchanging. Bring your moments to me, and I will fill them with vibrant joy. Now is the time to rejoice in my presence. Amen. Oh, my. All right, so I'm a country guy. You know that. Born and raised. Worked farms. Had cowboy boots before cowboy boots were cool. It's kind of funny. I still have my first pair of cowboy boots. Years and years ago, a friend of mine owned a cowboy store, clothing, boots, and stuff. And he took that old dirty pair of beat-up cowboy boots that I had sitting in a box somewhere. I'm not a hoarder, but I do save things. I just rolled my own eyes. I don't know. Maybe I am a hoarder. My house doesn't look like those houses on the hoarding shows, but I have many things that go all the way back to before my childhood. So I'm a country guy and own country radio stations and worked on country radio stations. It's my second choice of music. Before Jesus Mugged Me, it was my first. Now my first is I just love Christian music. I love gospel. I love bluegrass. I love contemporary. I love old hymns. I love kick 'em in the butt Christian songs, you know. But when 9/11 rolled around, I had just been mugged by Jesus. No, I'm sorry. I had not yet been mugged by Jesus because it happened in 2001, and I got mugged in 2010. But Alan Jackson has always been one of my favorite artists, and I'm not going to play the song. If you don't know it, look it up on YouTube. It was a song that he wrote, and that's one of the reasons I like Alan Jackson. I like Clint Black. I've always been someone who was a big fan of writers and performers. So people who not only performed a song, but they performed the songs they wrote. And the song that Alan Jackson recorded, Where Were You? Where were you on 9/11? You know, it says in the song, I don't know the difference between Iraq and Iran. You know, the planes hit the towers. It's a great song. And it moves me back to that time of emotion, of watching those towers, physically watching the plane come into that second tower. I didn't see the first one. My business partner, Pat, and I were on the road that day. We were driving to Chicago because we wanted to check out a restaurant theme that we were thinking about duplicating, stealing, copying, the best form of flattery. And we were about, I think, Mitchellville or so. So we had just gotten started. And it's kind of interesting because the way the day started is the Lord kept giving us, hold on. No, not yet. Don't leave yet. You know, we rented a car, and the rental car wasn't ready for us. And I think I was late for some reason, getting my butt out of bed, or I don't remember the circumstances. But we were hurried to get to Chicago so we could check out this restaurant because we were coming back that night. So we had a, 6-hour drive one way, 6-hour drive coming back, and whatever time we had on the ground. So we had a 15-hour day ahead of us. And Pam, my assistant, my right-hand person, called and said, you have the TV on? I said, no, we're on the road. Well, turn on the radio. Why? Just turn on the radio. It's not good. And so, like most Iowans, we turned to 1040 WHO and listened to the live reports of reporters, anchor people, journalists in New York City who had just witnessed either live or on tape, because there's a camera that pointed at the Twin Towers at all times. And so the airplane that flew into it the first plane, everybody saw. And, of course, the initial feeling was, oh, what a horrible accident. Somehow a jetliner, hello, Steve Miller, had flown into one of the world's tallest buildings. And what a tragedy that it was. And so Pat and I immediately turned the car around and drove directly to my home in Beaverdale at the time and turned on the TV. And literally within minutes, not 5, but minutes, we watched live that big jet airliner kind of take that turn. Their wings went from equally horizontal to not vertical, but they made a sharp turn. And they flew into the second building. And it was, I'll never forget it. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, and I'm sure you are too. Oh my gosh. It wasn't an accident. It was on purpose. We didn't know who yet. We didn't know the perpetrators, but we now knew it was not accidental. And then pretty soon, a jetliner, I should just say airplane, flew into the Pentagon. And there was videotape on that. And the one place we don't have videotape, but we have audio, is the plane that, because of the heroics of the passengers, did not reach its said destination, which was supposedly either the Capitol or the White House, but instead went nose first into a field in Pennsylvania, which is now honored. That ground is sacred. There's some type of monument there, unless Black Lives Matter has decided it's not something we should have, and they've taken it down. I'm sorry, that was snippy of me, wasn't it? I apologize. And Pat and I sat there for, I don't know, a couple hours, and then he felt he needed to be home with his wife and child. I had called my wife and my kids and said, everybody okay? You know, are you coming home? And the ones that were in school at the time said, Dad, they've got us in, you know, the gym with the TV on, and we're all watching this. And my older kids who were not in school, you know, they were, yeah, Dad, we're seeing it. I'm at work, or I'm home, or whatever. And the whole world, not just United States, the whole world was watching this attack on the United States in a very likely target that had been, I guess, attacked before, and that was the World Trade Centers. And I remember, I can't think of his name now, the African-American reporter on CNN. Bernie somebody. And the reason I liked, or maybe I should just say I remember that, because Bernie was also in shock. He was raw. He was transparent. He couldn't believe what he was watching either. Those jetliners were filled with fuel, airline fuel. It's a different kind of fuel. It's not a gasoline. It's a fuel, and it's an invisible fuel, much like you see race car drivers use. And so even though a person might be on fire, the flames and heat are very real to them, but to the naked eye, we can't see it. And when those airplanes drove into the side of those buildings, the contact between the airplane and the building was not what caused such a horrible disaster, even though that didn't help. And everybody assumes that the terrorists knew what they were doing because it became a bomb. When that plane exploded after it got inside the building, see, it didn't explode before the building. It exploded while going through the building. And it never came out on the other side. Now think about that. Did you ever think about that? Here's a jet airliner 747, 727, 737, whatever. These are big planes. Hundreds of people on board. A wingspan of what, 40 yards? Flies into a building on one side but doesn't come out on the other. It's because it exploded. And the fuel, the vape, went high and went low. If it hit on the 102nd floor, it would burn top and bottom. And it would immediately vaporize a human being. Those that were above the plane crashes didn't survive hardly at all. And some of those that did, we watched those unbelievable pictures of people jumping to their death. Can you imagine? You really don't know completely what's happened, but you know your building is just being evaporated by some type of an amazing bomb. And if you jump 100 stories, the likelihood that you'll survive the fall is slim to none. And Slim just walked out the door. No one who jumped survived. No one. Nobody. I don't like the word everybody and nobody, because very rarely is it true. But in this case, nobody survived that fall, that jump. Good morning, Gail. How are you? Love you, buddy. Excuse me. But I remember Bernie Williams, was that his name? I think, Bernie, the African-American anchor on CNN. I remember somehow somebody got a close-up of a camera shot of someone jumping out. At first they thought, well, it was debris that was falling from the building. And then I remember Bernie saying, oh, my God, I think that's a human. I think they just jumped. And then the camera would close in on the upper floors or the lower floors, and there would be people with a broken window, and they were hanging out the window trying to breathe because the air was consumed with jet fuel and smoke and fire. I mean, the most destructive things on earth were all playing against those people in those buildings. And then somebody else jumped. And then a third. And then it became way, way, way too common to watch. I don't know what you felt. I have no idea. But I know what I felt when those people jumped. It was a feeling of forlornness. I was so lost in what their emotions could have been. But see, we didn't see the inside of the building. We only saw the smoke and fire pouring out of windows after they were broken. And let me tell you something. It wasn't easy to break those windows. Those weren't like the windows on your house. Those windows were put up to survive the weather, the wind, everything at 100 stories high. And when they broke one out, the smoke came bellowing out. I don't know what other word to use, bellowing, just smoke after smoke after smoke after smoke, and you'd see these humans laying outside or trying to stand outside that window, trying to catch fresh air. Can you imagine the thought process? I can't. I can describe it, but I can't imagine it. Meaning I can't put my place, I can't put myself in that position where I would choose to jump to my death. And the only reason they would have made that choice is if they realized if they stayed, their bodies would be burned to a crisp. And that was going to hurt. That was going to be one heck of a painful death. And jumping and hitting the ground like a fly hits the windshield. Splat. Done. Splat. Done. I'm pretty sure that nobody laid there for 30 seconds or a minute or an hour still alive in pain because they had jumped from one of the tallest buildings in the world. And then that moment in which I believe Tower 1 was the one that fell first. And like an implosion, it collapsed on itself, which means the fire and the bomb and the destruction that was happening on the inside was burning cement, concrete, and steel. And just like an implosion that so many of us, watch TV to watch the hotel in Las Vegas being imploded or a bridge to be imploded. I mean, everybody, I don't know about everybody. I think a lot of people watch implosions because it's pretty cool. And it's the science behind it. Well, you take these pillars out first, and then you take these out, and then you remove this support system, and eventually it just caves in on itself. Well, it's as if, I don't know, they just began to fall in on each other and fell. And the bodies that had jumped and lay on the ground were gone. The building fell on them. People who were trying to escape in the stairwells, their bodies were never found. It was pretty crazy and horrible. And there are words to describe what happened. And they aren't my words because I don't think I could describe them, but I take them from those people on the TV. Do you remember the young adults? I'm not going to say kids because they were 20 plus. And they had this bird's eye view of the Twin Towers, probably a mile away, maybe a little more, pretty high up, almost parallel. And somebody had their video camera going, or I don't think we had video phones back then. Maybe we did, I don't know. And the cries, the shrieks from the faces that you never saw because the video camera was pointed at the towers. But the realization that was setting in with these people as the camera caught the visual, the audio were crying, screaming, "Oh my God, what's happened? Well, what is that? Is that someone jumping? Oh my God, they're jumping from the bell. Oh, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here." Because if you were in a building in New York, you didn't know if you were next. What else would you do? Just sit there and watch? I'm sure some did. That's okay. I think if I would have been in a high-rise somewhere in New York at that given moment, I'd be out of there. And the elevators weren't working. As the towers fell, they fell on people. They fell on other buildings. And what is commonly now referred to as ground zero became several blocks wide. several hundred of feet deep. One of the components of a lot of buildings in a metropolitan area like New York, Chicago, even Des Moines. Take the financial center, for example, in downtown Des Moines. It has 3 levels of parking below ground. Now, I know there are high parks, we used to call them when I was a kid, or ramparts that go up 1 floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor, 5th floor. But the Twin Tower, I mean, you don't have the luxury of wasting real estate like that in a city like New York. And so they just dug a little deeper. And their floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, floor 4 for parking was underground. B1, basement. B2, basement. And as these buildings collapsed upon each other, these holes in the ground where those buildings were set into a foundation, you don't get to be as tall as those buildings were and as close together as they were and not have a pretty thick foundation way, way, way down. And the buildings collapsed on each other way, way, way down. The dust. Remember the dust? Remember the few people that were able to capture what was happening on tape or film? And as the towers fell, those billows of smoke and gas and toxic air just billowed down the streets of New York City. It's like they had a mind of their own, and when they came to an intersection, they knew they could turn, and they did. And many, many, many of those buildings were destroyed, not because they fell in on each other, just because the toxic fluids and gas and odors and smells and dead people just destroyed them. And they could never be occupied again. And then there are the first responders. God bless them. God bless them, everyone. I know for years, well, I still do it today. I thank firefighters for what they do. I thank EMT people for what they do. I thank nurses. I thank policemen. I thank doctors. Don't thank lawyers usually. Sorry, another sarcastic jab. Those people unselfishly ran in to the disaster while everybody else was running out. And as they climbed the stairways of the towers to try to get to the people above, most of those first responders perished. I have flags at home that were a part of the field of flags that we as a radio station put together with local insurance agents, or an insurance company, homesteaders. And I have a plaque that they gave me. But I also bought 12 of those flags that were displayed, one for every person who lost their life. And on every one of those flags, there's a yellow ribbon. And printed on that yellow ribbon is the name of the person who died in 9/11. And so many of them are first responders. If you were to come to my house today, there is a flag that sits on my front deck. And there's a yellow ribbon on it. For years and years and years and years, and for years to come, I will display those flags on 9/11, on 4th of July. I I displayed them on Flag Day and Memorial Day and Labor Day. Any darn day I want to. Because every time I look at one of those yellow ribbons, I know it stands for someone who never did anything wrong to the people who decided that their life was worthless, expendable, and somehow they had the right to take those lives. Oh, we hunted down Osama bin Laden. We hunted people down, and it took us years. Most of the people who know would tell you that we got them. We made them pay the price. We invaded Iraq, Iran, Libya. We invaded countries. We removed governments. We took out terrorists and their families. Our flesh took as much collateral damage as we could take to make them pay for coming after America. What a tragic way to say, so proud to be an American. Don't tread on me. Don't mess with me. Don't fornicate with me. You come after me, us, Americans? You're coming down. Brad says we didn't invade Iran. What did we do? I don't know. I thought we invaded Iran too. Anyway. Oh, talking about Afghanistan. Yeah, you're right. That's what I thought. Osama bin Laden, the face that everybody knew, the long beard, the tall, wiry, 6'4", 6'5" man who was supposedly the quote-unquote mastermind behind 9/11. We finally found him years later. And I remember that day at the White House when President Obama walked down that long hallway and then stepped up to the podium and said, "We got him. We got bin Laden. We got him. He's dead." See, we don't take prisoners. They're fish food. That's right, Brad. It's one of the things I like about America. I don't know if it's a Christian thing. I don't know what God thinks. I know where God was on 9/11, and I think you probably do too. But taking those people out and then putting their bodies in the ocean so they can never be photographed, they can never be looked at, they can never be stolen, they can never be cut up. They're gone. They're done. That's it. You come after America and do those things that you did that day, you're done. There will be no 15 minutes of fame. Barbara Walters will not come into prison and interview you. You're done. You're dead. You're gone. You've been removed. I have a friend of mine who writes for a newspaper, a small newspaper, not a big deal. I went to journalism school with him. And he published on Sunday, September 15th of 2019. So just be a year here next, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, next Tuesday. He published part of the following, and I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. The headline is, "Where Was God on 9/11?" There are times in our life we will always remember. I will always remember where I was when I heard about the assassination of President Kennedy, or Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, or when the Challenger exploded, and of course, the events of 9/11. Some of those events seem to have happened a long time ago, and others, like 9/11, just seem like it wasn't that long ago. However, as recent as the events of 9/11 did happen, it's only 19 years. I realize that for those 20 years and younger, it is only history. In the past week, now this was written a year ago, in the past week we commemorated the 18th anniversary of the events of 9/11 that changed America. I would tell you it changed the world. The question, where were you when 9/11 happened, is not asked as much anymore, but we still remember. I do, at least. Maybe you do too. As if it was yesterday. The writer goes on to say, I remember that morning I was getting ready for my day when my wife called me into the living room to see the news report about an airplane that had just hit the Twin Towers in New York. One airplane might have been an accident, I thought. But two airplanes? Then another crash in Pennsylvania. And then an airplane diverted to Washington. Then the Pentagon. My wife and I were in shock and were glued to the TV for any tidbit of breaking news that would tell us what was going on. At first, I was reminiscent of the millennium bug, where it was feared that all the airlines would be out of control because the computers couldn't handle the new millennium. Then it was quickly brought up that this was an organized and deliberate effort by terrorists to attack America. And the events unfolded of the tragedy that shook America on that dreadful day we call 9/11. So where were you when 9/11 occurred? The writer goes on to say, I'm guessing if you were old enough to remember, you probably remember where you were. But another question that arises when tragedies like this happen is not where were you, but where was God? In the beginning, that question was asked by those who were in great pain, those who lost loved ones in the attacks, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, children, grandparents, best friends. It was also asked of people who were angry and wanted to blame someone or something for what had happened. Such an American characteristic. It's that part of justice that lives within us that gets a little ugly from time to time. Gail writes, I was delivering to the Home Depot listening to Bob and Tom. And as the second plane hit the tower, I had to get out. Another driver came in and told us the building had collapsed. Those people angry and wanted to blame somebody would quickly go to God and say, where were you, God? Why should you have kept this from happening? Why didn't you keep this from happening? And there were some who genuinely asked the question out of a hurting heart, desperate to understand how such a thing could happen. Where were you, God? Why did this happen? Or why did this happen? Why did my husband, wife, child, friend have to die? Why, God, why? 18 years later, again, this was written a year ago, we are still trying to make sense of that tragedy as well as others that happened nationally or even in our own personal lives. We say, where were you, God? Where were you? The writer goes on to say, rather than try any attempt to answer that philosophically or theologically question, I just firmly believe that as God promised to those who cry out to him, he is with us. I don't always know how God works or why God intervenes with some and does not with others. But I do believe he loves us and he helps us through the tragedy. Isaiah 43, verse 2 and 3 says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior." A hurricane in the Bahamas and the East Coast. Fires out in California. Other tragedies that have happened and are happening in our lives right now. I strongly believe, the writer writes, I strongly believe that God is there willing to be with us to help us through those times. And when a loved one dies, I believe God is with them, ushering them to sleep, comfort, love, strength, and joy. Shortly after the events of 9/11, someone wrote a poem entitled, "Meet Me in the Stairwell." Author unknown, asking, "Where were you, God?" And the verses in the poem answered, "I was on the 110th floor in a smoke-filled room with a man who called his wife to say goodbye. I was at the base of the building with the priest ministering to the injured and the devastated souls. And the poem goes on to say, I was on all four of those planes, in every seat, with every prayer. One line in the poem even says, some met me for the first time on the 88th floor. Some sought me with their last breath. Some chose to ignore me, but I was still there. The writer goes on to say, when I heard that poem for the first time, it spoke to me deeply, recalling tragedies in my own life. I also sensed the presence of God with me, helping me through those traumatic times. And I know he was with my dad and with so many others who passed on to eternity and be with Jesus forever. Where were you when blank? Where was God when blank? Well, he was right there all the time with you. The writer of that letter is Dan Weiss. He's a pastor of a church, a man I've known for a long time. And, you know, we could Google, where were you on 9/11 and where was God on 9/11, and there would be hundreds of things online. But I guess because I know Dan, I always like to go back to what he wrote. Where was God in your disaster? In the death of your child? In the death of your mother or father? In the death of your spouse or a child? Where were you, God? You could have stepped in. With a flick of your pointing finger, you could have knocked that plane out of the sky. You could have sent angels to grab the plane and set it on the ground safely, so none of those people had to die. Where were you, God? The Bible tells us many, 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 many stories of where God steps in. We call them miracles. I think God just calls them sad, sad, sad days. days that he never planned, days he never wanted to happen. We were not created to create days and events like that. We were created to love, offer grace, and forgiveness for those people who would do such a horrible thing. That's right. Can you forgive them? Have you ever asked God to help you forgive them? Forget their souls. Forget their bodies. Those people that flew the planes, that drove the vehicles to get to the planes, the people at the airport who were also involved. Some names we'll never know. Some disappeared shortly and returned to wherever they were from. But we knew God was right there. He was watching it with us. He saw every inch of those planes fly into those buildings. He was there in the stairway. He was there in the floor. He was there outside. He was with every single person that perished that day. And God, we believe you are a mighty God. In fact, we believe you can do, are you ready? Can I use that word, please? God, we believe you can do anything. These were innocent people that died for a really, really terroristic reason, just because we could. We don't like you, America. We don't like you, Christians. We don't like your faith. We don't like your God. We don't like you. We're jealous of you. We covet you. You are infidels, and should I get a chance, I'll take a machete and cut off your head. And there will be a camera running, and everyone will know how much I despise you. I don't care about your children, your babies, your spouses, your husband, your wife, your parents. I don't care about your job, your house, your friends. I just want to hurt you. I want to take your life. You either convert to our way of thinking or we'll take you out. And they did that day. And you ask, where was God? Well, I have good news. In the midst of this tragedy, because we're living it again. No, there's no planes hitting buildings, but we're wearing masks everywhere. We have a pandemic that is impacting every single person in this country. Do you understand that? In many ways, this pandemic is bigger than 9/11. There are some people who weren't fazed by 9/11, didn't care. Didn't matter the color of their skin or their creed or their religion. They just didn't care. So what? It's politics. If we'd leave them alone, they'd leave us alone, someone might say. Yeah, that's my answer. Where was God when your wife died? When your husband died? Where were you when the phone rang? And a voice at the other end said, "Hi, do you know Bob Smith? Do you know Ann Smith? Do you know?" Yeah, I do. That's my mom. That's my dad. That's my spouse. That's my son. That's my daughter. Why? Why are you asking? Sir, there's been an accident. And I'm sorry to tell you that your son, your daughter, your mother, your father, your spouse, your aunt, your uncle, your friends, your grandson, your granddaughter has died. And that moment is seared into your mind. And life will never be the same again. You hit a brick wall. You expected to keep going forward. My father would be there. My mother would be there. My spouse would never leave me. I'd die before my spouse. I'll never have to live without my spouse. Well, my child. I'm not supposed to bury a child. I'm not supposed to go to the funeral of someone who got a disease, and that disease consumed their body and eventually made that life extinguish into nothing. We wrap them up and we put them in a box and we put them underground. And we mark the spot so we can go and quote unquote talk to them. Silly us. Or we can go and just feel the presence of them somehow, some way. Feel their spirit, hear their voice, hear their laughter. Maybe once again remember the hand that we held that clenched us so hard because they didn't want to go. They wanted to be healed. They wanted to be here. And people prayed. There were circles. There were prayer chains. There were requests over and over and over to say, God, where were you? My friend Brad lost a child, lost a daughter. He writes, when your child dies, when we expect our parents to die at some point, we know we're going to die, but our children aren't supposed to have a child die. For me, my faith in the whole thing, it was the only thing that made it possible to make it through that dark valley. I remember that day when Brad lost his daughter. Tragic car accident. I remember that day when we gathered in the chapel at Hope. 10, 12, 15 guys, all brothers in Christ. And we tried to console Brad, but how do you console someone when they've just lost their daughter? And what I read there a moment ago is absolute truth. I'll never forget the strength that Brad drew from his faith, knowing that he'd be with that daughter again. And at least in our presence, or my presence. Brad never shook his fist at God and said, where were you? Oh, he might have in the darkness, in that valley, that dark valley. But those of us who follow him, those of us who believe in him, those of us who have a relationship with him know that he is always with us. He was there on 9/11. He was with Brad when his daughter was killed. He's with you when your mom and dad die. He's with you when your child dies. He's with you when your spouse dies. And the only solace we can take moving forward is God did not create us to die. He created us to be sinless and live forever. And sin enters into our lives and takes that physical life. Through disease, through tragedy, through accident. But always remember that with Jesus by your side, as he was with Brad and us men that day, when we had to say goodbye to his daughter, Jesus is there, taking us home, allowing us to rest in peace. Until he comes back and takes us home. And then you'll see your mom, and you'll see your dad, and you'll see your child, and you'll see your spouse, and your neighbor, and your loved one. And you know that in the blink of an eye, the snap of a finger, you're alive again with Jesus. And that's where God was on 9/11. He was giving you hope that one day you too will return to his bosom. Amen. Amen.